Okay.
So, hello everyone. Welcome to the Systemic Modeling Group meeting. Now, we are happy to have Haire from the Birkbeck College that is going to give us a seminar about abstract concepts and interoception. So, please, Joe, the stage is yours.
Hello.
Before we start, I want to dedicate this meeting for Gabriel, who is now going through a difficult moment in the hospital. So when he sees this, please, Gabriel, you know, we are all thinking about you. So a lot of energy for you. Okay. Thank
Okay.
you, Joe.
Hi. Hi, everyone. I'm Joe. I'm finishing my master's dissertation at Birkbeck, and this is it. This is a kind of a part of it. It's a philosophy dissertation, so I'm just focusing here on the neurobiology, which I think will probably be of more interest to you. But if you want to talk about philosophy, I'm very happy to do that. So I teach philosophy to I'm teaching a sixth form group of 17-year-olds ethics at the moment. So I'm interested in how students learn and understand abstract concepts like justice and freedom and democracy and so on. And I'm hoping to continue this research in a doctorate in educational neuroscience, perhaps at Birkbeck or UCL. So my research question for my dissertation seems quite a simple question, but does affect constitute abstract concepts? Now, in essence, I want to understand where the meaning of abstract concepts come from, which brain processes govern how this happens, and which factors influence how children acquire them. So I'm going to give you my abstract first, my conclusions first as outlined in my abstract. Then I'm going to show you how I arrived at my conclusion. So I argue that yes, affect does constitute at least some kinds of abstract concepts, and this means that they, and thus cognition, are embodied. I claim the meaning of abstract concepts arises from allostatic processes which regulate physiological systems in which affect is a necessary constituent, which is quite an important qualification that it's necessary. So this view adopts a Bayesian probabilistic model of cognition, which conceives of the brain as a prediction machine, that's kind of Clarke's idea, that models the body's anticipated needs before they occur to minimize the free energy within the system, which is Friston's concept. Can I just ask, are any of you familiar with the predicting and coding approach to cognition and Friston's free energy principle? If you could just hang on a minute. Is there any way of because I haven't got the view where I can look at chat, unfortunately, because I've got it in the wrong mode. So you a thumbs up from Tajani.
Yeah,
Oh,
of course.
cool. Oh,
sorry.
Sorry, Olga, carry on.
I'm not familiar in the context which you just mentioned, but I'm familiar with Bayesian probabilistic model. But
Good.
like of cognition, I can abstractly understand what's going on, but not precisely.
Well, it's a very interesting model that Friston has worked with Clarke on, and Friston's at UCL, Carl Friston, and he has this. He's a neurobiologist, but also a physicist. So he's applying the free energy principle to the way that neurons encode information in the brain in kind of descending and ascending predictions to kind of minimize energy loss, which is hugely physiologically demanding. So the brain uses about 20% of our energy. So to minimize that is kind of incorrect predictions is very important. So if any, I know a lot of you are mathematicians, so you'll be able to understand it much better than I can. So I have got links at the back for Friston and Seth and Clarke's work. So the predictive coding approach to cognition counterintuitively proposes that instead of the brain responding to external stimuli, which is what we kind of generally think our brains do, the idea is our brains make sense of the world by predicting what we're about to experience. These predictions are then updated in real time as we navigate the world. So based on the cybernetics principle that anything which regulates a system must contain an internal model of that system, Lisa Feldman Barrett argues that this internal model represents the most likely changes in our internal affective states as concepts that categorize these sensations for these to become meaningful to us, which I'll explain later on. For example, emotion concepts such as happiness or sadness are predictions constructed from cognitive appraisals of the body's expected internal affective states. And the brain models these, it does this, it generates these predictions as it models the impact the external world has on our internal states, which is where interoception comes in. So using Barrett's 2017 theory of constructed emotion, I argue that such conceptualization requires allostasis, which you could say is a biological form of causal inference. And I think that the conference we were at in January this year, Thomas, was about causal inference. So this is a biological form in which the internal perception and representation of affect is known as interoception. So this brings me to my thesis from my paper, which defend Feldman Barrett's theory of constructed emotion, or TCE, because it's easy to say. I advance an embodied account of conceptualization. So on TCE, affective representations, that is, representations of interoceptive inference, are necessary constituents of abstract concepts. And this means that abstract concepts are embodied as affect is a constituent of the mind. Now, this embodied view of conceptualization I'm defending, where abstract concepts contain body representations, is quite controversial within cognitive science, as concepts are conventionally held to be represented only by linguistic symbols. That is, they don't contain bodily information. So what I'm going to do now is explain some of the key terms and ideas, and then I'm going to take you through my argument. So as a philosopher, I'm interested in the meaning-making process of neurobiology, and that's where my dissertation is going to focus. But in this seminar, I've tried to minimize the philosophical argument and focus on the neurobiology. So affect, as it's generally understood, in modern psychology, means it's the kind of the mental counterpart of the internal bodily representations associated with emotions, but it's generally held to mean anything emotional as kind of a shorthand. But that's the kind of the accurate terminology. Now, concepts, well, there's an idea, this idea that concepts are divided into concrete forms and abstract forms. And this references the ontological distinction customarily made between concrete and abstract entities. So that's a reference in Kuster et al. At the back of my in the last page of the presentation. So the thing is, though, that this distinction is being increasingly challenged because it's not clear that one can separate concrete from concreteness from abstractness. And I think that this predictive coding mechanism and the way it's enacted in the brain really kind of, it removes the need for such a distinction. But I'm getting ahead of myself now. So concrete entities are said to exist in space-time independently of human minds and language. So they contain what's known as modal or perceptual representations such as sight and touch, so that a concrete concept such as a chair engages our sensory motor systems as we see and then sit on it. But abstract entities are said not to exist in space-time and rather to depend on human minds and language, as they require our kind of interchange to agree on their meaning. And conventionally, abstract concepts are held to be formed from a modal system, which mean they don't contain perceptual symbols. and they are supposed to refer to things or properties we cannot directly perceive. For example, how could an abstract concept such as justice refer to anything we can directly perceive? And this is what I want to directly challenge, that we can't perceive it. I'm sorry, I've got a bit of a sore throat. So when we come to thinking about how conceptualization happens, I'm contrasting and just two of the major current approaches, which is the Fodor's classic computational model and embodied cognition. So according to embodied theories of cognition, cognitive processes are deeply rooted in the body's interactions with the environment. Indeed, Shapiro argues that the body plays a constitutive role in cognition, meaning that it's not just a causal factor, but it's actually part of the cognitive system itself, which is a very important kind of claim. That generally advocates of embodied concepts thus propose concepts include contributions from our emotion and sensory motor systems, whereas Fodor's computational view claims that concepts are entirely amodal. They've got no sensory motor content. They're just amodal, linguistic, and arbitrary. So embodied cognition is presented with a bit of a challenge to account for abstract concepts because they're not believed to be formed of perceptual symbols. So critics of embodied cognition may indeed question whether the body's role in conceptualization is constitutive or just causal. And they wonder if you can actually empirically test this distinction. Now, my research examines whether affect causes or constitutes abstract emotion words. And the dialectic underlying my argument is looking at the difference between causal influences on the mind versus constituents of the mind. And I argue that affect is actually a constituent of the mind. So I argue that internal bodily sensations or affect, this supplies the perceptual content required for these concepts to be considered embodied. So I'm questioning several of Fodor's assumptions about the classic computational account of conceptualization, which is the ontology of abstract concepts, meaning what are they actually made of? What kind of stuff are they? And then secondly, how do we acquire abstract concepts? Which brain processes govern this? Now, the computational view of cognition has a bit of a problem to account for how these abstract symbols in the brain come to be associated with actual things in the world. So they don't have a causal connection, whereas embodied cognition views would argue that perceptual symbols do have that causal connection with the world. So the computational view is believed to encounter what's known as the symbol grounding problem, which was Harnad's idea back in 1990. And I don't know if any of you have encountered the thought experiment that Searle concocted to kind of to prove this was a problem. It's called the Searle's Chinese room. We could talk about that if you're interested at the end. So the thing is that embodied theories of concepts are believed to face the opposite problem, which is known as the symbol ungrounding problem, which is Dove's idea. Because if abstract concepts conventionally refer to things or properties we can't actually perceive, like justice, for example, how can conceptual representations that are grounded in sensorimotor systems capture this abstract conceptual content? So if the content of justice can't be directly experienced by us, arguably there are no perceptual representations associated with it to be grounded. So if such symbols aren't grounded in direct external perceptual experience, the problem of how they could be represented in sensorimotor systems remains, which is this is the philosophical heart of my dissertation, which is this: how do you solve the symbol ungrounding problem? And my argument is that, here we go. Sorry, I should have turned the slide on. So how do we capture, how does an embodied conceptual system capture this abstract content. So the solution that I think would work is founded on the argument that the internal perception of affect can be substituted for the missing external sensoromotor information alongside linguistic content to represent abstract words such as happiness, justice, and fairness, which are abstract words, they're kind of abstract concepts. So Kuster et al. Argue that although abstract words are considered to be unrelated to experiential information, there's one type of experiential information, namely affective information, which plays a crucial role in the processing and representation of abstract concepts. So my view is that the symbol ungrounding problem can therefore be addressed if we consider that the internal perception of affect occurs during interoception, which I'm going to explain in a moment. So affective representations may then supplement or substitute for the missing sensory information. So interoception, what exactly is it? So interoception as an idea has antecedents in a long tradition of empiricist thought, including...
Excuse me, sorry, can you go back to the slide? I couldn't finish reading.
Sorry.
Just one sec, because I think it's crucial, this part, for me to follow.
Okay.
Thank you.
Should I slow down?
Okay. Yeah, please go ahead. No. It was me that I couldn't read.
Okay, so the idea of interoception has come out of a kind of this long tradition of empiricism in philosophy. And through Locke and who else? Yes, anyway, some philosophers in the 17th century, but it's got a more recent expression in the psychologist William James's influential argument that our experience of emotion can be characterized as our perception of changes in our internal bodily states, and that these bodily changes partly constitute such emotional experience, which is an important kind of claim that I make. So since James, emotion theorists have drawn on his insight to accept that our emotions involve our internal perception, which is our interoceptive awareness of the neural representation of the physiological condition of the body. So the hypothesis of the theory of constructive emotion, in the view of McCormack and Lindquist, is that emotion concepts are partly constituted by the representation of changes in our internal bodily sensations, so that emotions arise when these affective signals are conceptualized as an instance of emotion, which vary according to the context we're in. Barrett explains that this means that an emotion is your brain's creation of what your bodily sensations mean in relation to what's going on around you in the world. For example, we could conceptualize trembling, the experience of trembling, as meaning we feel fearful, angry, or cold, depending on the situation you're in. So the actual signals themselves, there's agreement amongst philosophers and theorists of emotion, cognitive science and neuroscience, that these interoceptive signals come from the soft tissues and viscera, the internal organs, the muscles, the skin, the gastrointestinal tract, and our hormonal, immunological, and autonomic nervous system. So it's an entire sensory system embodied in every tissue in the body, which gives the brain essential information about how the body's doing. So importantly, these signals are actually felt as internal bodily sensations, such as our heartbeat. Have you ever thought about what a heartbeat is? We're not necessarily actually feeling the heartbeat. It's actually an interoceptive sort of simulation that we're feeling of the heartbeat. And we also understand our breathing rate, our temperature, muscle tension, hunger itself, pain, thirst, itch, pleasurable sensual touch, headache, and ligament strain. These are all sensations which the brain creates, which is quite wild when you think about it. So the purpose of these sensations is to provide continuous feedback about these body states to our interoceptive system, which prompts action to maintain our physiology within ideal homeostatic limits, which is kind of essential for our survival. So, for example, TCE argues low blood glucose may be experienced variously as unpleasant sensations of either lightheadedness, hunger, or even anger. So if you ever felt hangry, that's what your brain's trying to work out. Am I angry or am I hungry? No, I'm both. I'm hungry and angry. So these sensations remind us to eat to restore our blood glucose, which is kind of essential to keep us alive, really. So what I'm going to talk next is about how these sensations managed, how this works. So there's an idea about called core affect. And Damasio and Carvalho argue it's a crucial characteristic that these sensations are experienced as being either pleasant or unpleasant. That is, they've got intrinsic positive or negative valence because they're powerful proxies of ongoing biological value. And the overall condition of the body, represented by these valenced affective sensations, thus gives us the overall sense of how our bodies are doing from moment to moment. And they engender this global conscious experience or feeling called core affect. Now, Anil Seth and others argue that indeed our very sense of self is generated by these valence feelings. We have a sense of well-being or just feeling a bit rubbish, we're tired, we're bored, we're grumpy. It's the valence of these interoceptive sensations which is providing us with this kind of overall feeling of core affect of how we are. Now, these sensations also vary in the degree of arousal they stimulate in us, from drowsiness to alertness. So simply put, the intensity of these valence sensations varies according to the deviation from homeostatic balance they represent. So they alert us to regulate, to adapt our behavior so we can actually act to influence these states, to regulate our body state. So this core activity of the brain, which not only keeps us alive, but enables us to adapt to changing circumstances, is known as allostasis, which is another of the key concepts that I'm dealing with. So allostasis can be therefore thought it's in a biological form of causal inference, because the interoceptive system is inferring what these body states mean, and it's influencing the system to kind of make changes to bring it back to kind of a stable level. So, oh, sorry, I forgot to move the slide on. So that's the kind of interoception is part of allostasis. Interoception provides the information, but allostasis is the biological system which causes the adaptation. We can actually change our body state. So we might ask, in conceptualization in TCE, what are the actual neural mechanisms involved in categorizing such bodily sensations as examples of an emotion during interoception and allostasis? So on TCE, conceptualization involves the cognitive appraisal or prediction of the reasons for these changes in our core affective states during allostasis. And they construct an instance of an emotion which is highly variable and contextually situated. For example, fear can be experienced as silent withdrawal, agitated pacing, or aggression, depending on the context we're in. So on this view, affective representations are kind of absolutely necessary constituents of emotional concepts. Now, they would be alongside exteroceptive representations, that's kind of external representations of the world, and conceptual and semantic knowledge about emotion we've accumulated through our memory of previous emotional experience. So a situated conceptualization happens when all of these elements, core affect, vision, and our conceptual knowledge and memory are combined to make this conceptualization in the moment. And then through allostasis, we infer what those signals actually mean in combination in the context. And we say, okay, here in this context, I'm feeling fear. I see a snake. Personally, I'm quite scared and I might freeze or run away. So someone else might not respond in that way. So, and what happens if we predict we see a snake because we've seen one before generally, and our body knows what to do, and it begins to make the preparations for us to kind of to run away if necessary. So what this all means is that, you know, this comes back to the idea of the brain as a prediction machine, which is Clarke's idea and Barrett's idea. So Clarke and Barrett argue that for our brain to accurately regulate our internal states during allostasis, it generates a model of the self interacting with the environment. So predictions are generated as the brain models the impact the external world has on our internal states to categorize and interpret these interoceptive signals from the body. In other words, concepts are applied to interoceptive signals. So there's a categorization process going on. Now, in everyday life, I think that we use abstract concepts as we learn how to manage social encounters. For example, in a dispute, we make judgments about what's fair to all parties. So TCE would argue that we construct a situated conceptualization to understand the meaning of fairness, which is based on prior experience and subtly varies in each situation we encounter. So in other words, we apply the concept fairness to predict and categorize the interoceptive signals we experience in such scenarios. Thus, we learn to make judgments based on our valenced responses to situations to understand what is fair, to effectively navigate social life. And I think this is how children learn the meaning of abstract concepts such as fairness and equal share in play, for example. There is empirical support for this, for the salience of valence for abstract conceptualization, sorry. And this comes from Kuster et al.'s research, which finds that abstract words are more emotionally valent than concrete words, and they have a privileged link with affective information, such that emotion plays a crucial role in the acquisition of abstract word meanings. Now, this is where there's controversy about how reliable this and replicatable this these experiments actually are, and some say that there's no privilege linked to abstract concepts and emotion. But anyway, I think this process can also explain how we acquire and use the more complex abstract concepts of justice, democracy, and freedom, because we have an understanding of what it feels to be free or not free, or an understanding of what it feels like to live in democracy or not live in a democracy, and therefore also of justice. So I think that words do have valence. They have they carry valence for us, maybe not for others. So in my view, predictive simulation provides a compelling explanation of conceptual categorization, as it describes a fundamental process of life regulation. In other words, judging the likely meaning of body state is a biological imperative which necessitates such intentional mental states. For instance, our ability to discern between the abstract concepts hunger and anger occurs as meaning is attributed to the expected causes of changes in body states, such as a raised heart rate or low blood glucose. Accordingly, a distribution of conceptual simulations is generated, which function to accurately predict such changes using previous simulations of hunger and anger as a guide. Barrett argues that as your brain thus uses your past experiences to construct a hypothesis, the simulation, this is compared to the signals it's receiving from sensory input. So it's kind of correcting them at the same time. So these conceptual simulations are thereby corrected by the incoming sensory signals, which provide prediction error, which is Friston's idea. So incoming data is matched to the simulation it best resembles, either hunger or anger held in memory. Barrett argues in this way, the brain constructs meaning by correctly anticipating, predicting, and adjusting to the incoming sensations, where accurate simulations are categorizations that maintain physiological regulation, guide action, and construct perception. So my conclusion is that emotions are abstract concepts that we construct to explain the likely causes of changes in our body states, and that the meaning of an abstract concept such as sadness thus arises from the predictive allostatic processes optimizing physiological systems in which affect is a necessary constituent. So I think that the symbol ungrounding problem can be addressed or solved even if we think about affect in this way, in the way it contributes. Now, Barrett and Clark might also say that valence is the conscious experience of the correction of the predictions we make about what we're perceiving, which is quite wild, really, when we're trying to make sense of the world. And Clark indeed claims that perception is really prediction, and to perceive is to find the predictions that best fit the sensory evidence to minimize prediction error, which is suboptimal for homeostasis. For example, we can predict that what we're seeing is a snake based on past experience and begin to record it in fright. But when sensory input corrects the prediction, oh, it's actually a coiled rope, not a snake, thank God for that. We thus find the prediction that best fits the sensory evidence, and we can recover our composure as our corticeval levels are stabilized by through allostasis. So in the model of emotion that I'm defending, emotion concepts such as fear and relief are predictive constructs constituted by simulations of affect, which are valenced interoceptive neural signals. So that's really where I've got to. But I have some kind of theoretical, I'm just going to hide that. So implications, I think, come from this. So I think that I've been quite cautious in my dissertation in trying to claim that affect constitutes all abstract concepts, because I probably get shot down for that. So I'm saying that it's limited to abstract words, but I would like to say that it constitutes all abstract concepts. So, some people say that affect, how could affect contribute to mathematical and scientific concepts? I don't feel any particular feeling about number 2, or I is the square root of -1, for example, or black holes. They don't feel like anything to me. But the argument is that our ability to think depends on affect. And the distinction between affecting and thinking is really, it's a mistaken assumption. So Michael Thomas at the Centre for Educational Neuroscience, who was at the conference that Thomas and I was at in January, he gave this very interesting presentation where he suggested that affect permeates all aspects of our brain function, which is a consequence of the way that our brains have evolved. Andy Clark claims that affect pervades neural modeling of both the world and our internal bodily states, and Barrett says that affect just constitutes conceptualization. So I'd like to be able to argue that, but I think that might be PhD. I don't know. Now, the other implication is very interesting. There's a paper that Manon Damasio have written called, oh God, what's it called? Hang on a sec. It's called haven't got it, sorry. It's about homeostasis and soft robotics. There we go. And my question is, if, could a robot have intentional mental states? Could they have moral concepts, for example? So in TCE, having a body is fundamental for allostasis because we have a body to regulate, and thus for us having intentional mental states. Now, you could object that soft robots with fluids in them and sort of organs that needed to be regulated would require homeostatic regulation using causal inference in an analogous manner for conceptualization. But I think that that would then be another form of embodied cognition, and that the robot actually might then have intentional states. So I've got references. I could have a lot more, but I ran out of time. So anyway, that is where I got to. Now I need to work out how to get my screen back to stop sharing. I'm not sure how to do it. Hang on.
Hello.
Hello.
So let's give a round of applause.
Thank you. I've got to work out how to stop sharing my
screen. I might be able to take the screen.
Maybe we don't need to stop sharing, because if someone will have a question, we can refer back to the slides. So I think it's really great idea to
Good point.
Joy, if it's okay with you, otherwise we can help you to stop the screen.
Hang on a sec. Oops.
No, it's on Zoom. The option isn't on Zoom.
It's not on Zoom. Okay.
It's but maybe I think I can totally take over whenever it's needed, because as a host I have this right somewhere. But okay, so very interesting talk. I think mind-blowing for some,
really?
maybe.
Sure, for sure.
Very, very interesting, and aligned to the projects of many of us.
Oh, really?
So I will make a very short comment, 1-minute comment, that we met in Oxford with Joe when we were at this conference about causal reasoning in humans and machines, organized by the Quantinum, the quantum computing company.
Yeah.
Where the scientific director is Bob Koeke. I don't know how to pronounce Koeke. You know, Dirk, how to pronounce Bob Koeke.
There we go.
Your microphone. Anyways, this guy, Bob, used to be he did his PhD at CLEA.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So, or maybe Fotis knows how to pronounce, yeah. Koek, yeah, Bob Koek, something like that.
Yeah,
because he's a Belgian guy. He used to be a PhD. He did his PhD at CLEA, and then he moved to Oxford, spent many years there, then became the scientific director of the largest quantum computing company in the world at the moment. I think they are the largest one. And they organize these events about cognition in human and machines, and they are very open. So there were neuroscientists and computer scientists, artificial intelligence people, and so on. And that's how we met with Joe. And we had really interesting discussions back then because, yeah, we're complex systems and these are quite connected and so on. So we promised to do this meeting maybe almost a year ago, and now it's happening. So it's good to see that we can keep our promises going.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing first to say. And so thank you very much for this talk. Now I have a couple of questions, but I don't know. I will not like to be the first. I think students here, these are all students, PhD students, or researchers from CLEA, or let's say junior researchers, maybe having a couple of years doing research, or PhD students. So this is a very curious audience. Yeah, please go with questions.
Can I be the first?
Yeah.
Yes.
You can introduce yourself a little bit, so but she knows you already. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you forgot. I was also at the conference participating
Oh
with
yeah,
Thomas.
that's right. You were
yeah.
too. Yes.
Yeah, I was there.
Yeah, Olga was there too. Yes.
I didn't meet you, Olga, sorry.
Yes. Yeah, all good. There were too many people, too many interesting things, so it's okay. First of all, thank you so much for amazing talk. It was like I was like all my neurons were on fire,
Really?
you know.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
yeah, on each slide. So just in case I won't forget, do you know a book, A Brief History of Intelligence by
No.
Max Bennett?
A Brief History of Intelligence. I'm just writing
Yeah.
this down.
Yeah, by Max Bennett. He explains very interesting. It actually can be interesting for everyone, not only for Josh. So this is amazing book, and they explain the evolution of intelligence and of neurons, of dopamine, serotonin, of other neuromodulators,
Oh, wow.
and from the cell level to artificial intelligence. This is a fascinating book, and I'd like to recommend you this book because he explains the concept of valence
Ah,
very detailed with
uh-huh.
graphics, with examples. So this is like amazing, the best explanation I saw about the valence which we're talking about, because he talked about valence, and there was also another very important parameter. I forgot right now. Maybe the affect. Yes, I think it was the affect actually. So he put this on the like X and
Plot.
Y. Yeah, thank you. And he explains how behavior is changing based on positions of the valence and
Yeah.
of the affect, and like in cells, and then humans, in fishes. So and then the reaction. So I think for you it will be really useful.
Yes.
Think you cannot even read the whole book. You can just find the chapter about the valence. It's like one or two chapters. Yeah, and I wanted to ask you. So you mentioned the concept like democracy, freedom, and everything. They are pretty complex ones, and I wanted to ask you some examples to ensure that I get you right. So do you think if some, like for example, if I'm in a huge building with a light, and when I'm talking to someone which I like, not like just like as a person, and we talk about the justice, will I have in my head the same concept in my head as I would have it in like in dark room watching politician interviews?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think that you probably would have a different conception of what justice means in each situation, actually. Yeah.
So this is exactly what you are defending. So you
Yes.
defend the abstract concept they based on something. Okay, so then my second example, you said like when we talk about mathematical equations or something like this, you don't really have any feelings
Oh,
to the
I think I'm saying that I think that's the argument people say against possibility of affect constituting abstract concepts like a black hole or I is the square root of -1. That how could they possibly contain affect? How could we have a feeling towards it? But I think that if we take Clarke's and Barrett's view at face value, it seems that really there's no reason why they wouldn't. It's not the same as proving that they do, but the model suggests that affect is permeating every aspect of this modeling, so that it's necessary for cognition itself.
Yeah, I just
Cool.
want to add that if, for example, you had a grandfather who was a mathematician and you spent a lot of, like warm days with him, and he would explain math to you,
Yes.
then obviously you would have another perception of mathematical equations. It would even change your career, than a person who had never interested in the math. So I just finished watching the debates about free will between Sapolsky and Neil Tyson, and it was really interesting because I didn't perceive a free will concept in the way they described it. And after they changed my definition, I was like, wow, that's interesting. And it refers to your work, because they say that actually all these perceptions of emotion, they are formulating since the beginning, and this is the only thing which drives us. So in this sense, there is no free will, because everything is driven by these emotional cognitive modulators, and the way we perceive something is refers to that, but not to our like free will, like total choice, of emotion. So in this sense, they argue that there is no free will yet.
That's interesting, because I think that predictive models suggest that, I think Clark and Barrett would argue that actually we do have free will because we can choose. However, our past experience may condition us to behave in ways that act against our free will. So it's an philosophically very interesting problem, actually.
Yeah, so because this is that he said that you can change it by default, you have no free will, and only if you are consciousness about your emotion, and you are like, okay, I have fear of this because I had past experience which caused fear, right? And then by default, you will have a fear about it in your future. But at some point, you can read a lot of neuroscientific articles and I don't know, go through the therapy or something, and you're like, wait a second. So actually, that's not me, that's my emotions, and I can distinguish myself from that. And then you start updating. So I think this refers to the updating function.
This is very interesting, Olga. Actually, there are lots of papers, if you're interested, I can send you, about the effect about stress and anxiety and trauma. And the argument is that that there's a disorder of interoception going on. There's a kind of a misallocation of allostatic load going on in stress and in depression and anxiety, because these body states are not being resolved, and this kind of that new information is not being incorporated. There's such a, I think they call it a hang on, I've got the there's a paper actually I've got saved at the back. Oh yes, precision weighting. So the kind of the weighting that's given to a particular prediction will be based on the importance that's been given beforehand, and that's affected by neuromodulators like serotonin and dopamine and so on. And so if you've got a highly reinforced pattern of predictions that you've experienced and keep experiencing, like in post-traumatic stress disorder, for example, it's going to be very difficult for new information and new ways of thinking about your situation to replace what's going on, because of that kind of what's it called? What do they call it? That precision weighting. So there's a lot of interesting work going on in psychology at the moment about how about the implications of it. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I of course I would ask much more questions, so I will contact you per email. But now I would like to
that would be fun.
Give time to everybody else. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Otis, would you like to ask a question?
No, I would only want to make a remark about the maths. I think that that's something which is handled by phenomenology by Husserl. So he thinks that you can, just by demonstrating something, activate the innate sense for maths, something like that. And that's also what mathematicians say. So I think it's an affect.
That is interesting. You can actively decide to like maths, and
yes. I wrote a paper about it, but it's like years ago. And so mathematicians themselves say that in some sense it's intuitive. The maths, that they are being pleased about writing a formula and finding a solution, and that it's really an affect.
Yes, that's interesting. I actually had the experience. I was really rubbish at maths at school until I had a different teacher who'd struggled with maths himself. He was a former dock worker in Liverpool, and suddenly my way of thinking about it changed. It was amazing, and I became good at maths for a while. Yeah, it was good.
No, and we have been reading the same books, so I don't have much questions for the time being, and we're writing about the same thing. So, and I am agreeing.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Actually, this, I don't know if anybody has a question. I have a few, and we have not so long time, so I will definitely encourage others to ask. Maybe, I don't know, Dirk, Diana, Fabricio, Ryan, Alejandra. Well, Alejandra just joined now. She's missing the talk. Anyone has a question?
I'll send you the PDF.
Yeah, no, I will share the video like right now after the meeting. In 1 hour from now, I think it will be posted, or tomorrow morning, the latest, and shared with everyone. So awesome talk. Well, okay. You can interrupt me, guys. Please interrupt me if you want to speak.
I just had
okay, great.
I had one comment, one thought about something about the experience of, for example, the experience of storytelling, or the experience of fiction, or the experience of music, for example, where we encounter strong physical sensations, or we encounter narratives that might be like fearful, for example, but we kind of, it's a little bit related to what you were saying about trauma, which I thought was also super fascinating. But this kind of, we can make this deliberate choice to kind of stay with things that are, for example, like a high intensity, and sort of surf that high intensity in order to create a kind of a sort of interesting experience for ourselves. Or a kind of artistic experience for ourselves.
So we can create a feeling and maintain that.
Yeah. So I was just, it's a half-formed thought, but I wondered what if you'd encounter some writing about this in relation to aesthetic experience, basically.
I haven't actually, but it's an interesting thought that you propose, that we can will ourselves into a particular brain state because it's good for us. I mean, basically, in biological terms, if it feels good, it's going to be it's going to be better for our immune system, for example.
It
allows us to regulate our emotions as well.
Sort of like the example of music, for example, the music, your physical state is being like highly triggered, say, by loud music, and in some sense your body would actively want to move away from this loud music source to kind of regain kind of homeostasis. But you can sort of, by staying in that state, your brain can then start interpreting it in new ways and start creating new narratives or new structures in that high intensity state. It's the same with, for example, with a scary story, right? Like you can stay within the fear of that story in order to generate more story and generate more fear, but that becomes like a very productive mode then to sort of, in some sense, like hack this space between your emotional state that's being generated by either by an external thing like a story or music, or even an internal narrative.
It's like a creative state that you're in, which is very productive. That's very interesting. I'll have a look and see if I can find anything. Creativity, I mean, creativity, actually, I think on the last slide I did have this this kind of reference to the kind of intentional mental states that we direct. Kind of these predictions are intentional mental states, which in philosophical terms is explained as an intentional mental state we direct at an object, like so the object would be music in this case, or a story, and we can direct our mental states at kind of fictional states in thought and imagination. You want to tell me what colors you want? So it's kind of it's also these kind of states are implicated in mind wandering, and there's a particular part of the brain which controls that called the default mode network, and that's associated with creativity, also with meditation. So we do have a lot of influence controlling our brain state, and also not when we're in the control of things like addictions. But that again, that could be another instance of a disordered interoceptive system.
So will you bring a plate up?
Where allostasis isn't working properly. So, yeah, very interesting. What the whole paradigm is quite mind-blowing, actually, to think.
It's fascinating.
That we're simulating everything. We're not actually directly experiencing inputs. We're actually we're experiencing this massive embodied hallucination.
Yeah. Fabricio, do you have a question?
Yeah, sure. First of all, my congrats for your awesome presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Well, my question is the next. I remember in my primary studies that Immanuel Kant, the famous philosopher, contributes so much for the research of taking over the truth about abstract conceptualizations.
Yes.
But he said that, I remember, I'm not an expert in this philosophical stuff, but I can remember that he said that we must to put all endeavors in universal attitudes to research and the abstract concepts instead of emotional and empirical evidence. And I see that your focus is the counterpart of Immanuel Kant. I don't know if I'm wrong, but my question is,
yes,
taking into account that it is necessary to take the universality features of the abstract concepts, don't you think that your focus of your dissertations have the intrinsic problem to depict that kind of universalities? I don't know how to say the universalities of the abstract concepts.
So
universality of abstract concepts.
Yeah.
Universality. So you think that there's a universality to abstract concepts that we all agree we can understand. So we can say that a chair is, so okay, not a chair, but peace is an abstract concept that we can understand, that has a universal meaning, and we come to agree upon it because we've learned that's what it means. And the same goes for democracy. But I think that yes, they do have a universal meaning, but they also have a distinct personal meaning, and that they aren't as kind of solid and uniform as ideas. I think that they're quite fluid and they have multiple meanings. I don't think there's just one meaning, but it's interesting. I'm afraid I don't know enough about Immanuel Kant to answer the specific connection to his work, but I think that Lisa Feldman Barrett's view is that we construct instances of abstract concepts which have also infinite variety, so that hunger can mean lots of different things. It can be constructed from lots of different interoceptive representations, and hunger in one moment means this and in another means that. And I think democracy, although it seems to have, yes, you can have a dictionary. So I think a dictionary definition of democracy exists. Obviously it does. That's what we, you can say it means that there's a right to vote, but it also has, I think, what's known as a normative content. A normative means it's a moral content, and it has a moral value that we can all agree on. So justice is another example of a normative concept. And this is very interesting, actually. So there's a lot of argument about this in moral philosophy, that about debate about where our moral concepts come from, and some argue that they've evolved, and that we have an innate sense of fairness, such that there's monkeys actually have an innate concept of fairness. So they will see someone else doing something they shouldn't be, and they will respond to that provocation or whatever. And I think that valence plays a really important part of normative concepts like justice and freedom and so on. So yes, thank you. That's a very interesting question. Has that answered your question at all or not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That I think let me ask a couple of quick questions just to finish. The first, that I have only two questions. One, it's about the concept hierarchy that you mentioned. I know there is a well-established research showing that people learn, retrieve faster, and think more, express more concepts that are an intermediate layer in the hierarchy. So if we have like the more basic thing, and then animal, and then mammal, and then dog, and then puppet, and blah, 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 we normally move, our cognitive activity is mostly in the middle of that.
Okay.
So I wonder how that accommodates with your proposal, that the intermediate layer, which is probably because it's the interface with the perception and the abstract emotion and so on, the interoceptive emotion. So I don't know how to accommodate that. If you have a quick answer, if not, we can discuss it later.
I think I can send you a paper about it, actually.
Yeah. Okay. So it's for further discussion, because I think it will be a very strong element. If you can answer that question with your approach, then you will match a lot of research done in cognitive psychology on concepts and hierarchies in the Fodor style and in the style of, I don't know, Tversky, Kahneman, and many other, or Hampton and other important authors in this field. So the second question is the symbol grounding problem that you were mentioning.
Yes.
And because this approach is biological, then it should apply as well for not less complex organic forms, like cells, for example, just to make the example very easy. How can we, or very bold, very strong case, do we assume that they also, without a nervous system, for example, because maybe we can make a distinction between having or not having a nervous system, but at what moment all this interoception comes into play? So what is the minimal biological requirements for your theory to be applicable?
I'm glad you
biological terms.
Because there is research shows that allostasis happens at the simplest form of life. Single-celled animals, single-celled life requires allostasis for its function. So it doesn't require a nervous system.
And that's what I was expecting. So now then, what could be so are we claiming that cells have emotions, have interoception, have a model of the world? So of course, this is not to have an answer now, but just to open this for thinking.
I thought that
How can we get with this anthropomorphic conceptualization of the phenomenology of emotions to non-human, like very far from human life forms?
Well, I think valence, I thought that you might ask a question like this, actually.
Yes.
I thought you'd be interested. So because of the regulatory mechanism involved in allostasis, I mean, I'll find some papers and send them your way, Thomas. But the valence is the argument. The view is that whilst animals, yes, dogs, cats, horses, birds will have emotions, they may not be able to conceptualize them in the same way because they don't have language, but they do have valence. And valence states will apply to very simple animals, actually, because they move towards situations which are chemically helpful or not, or harmful. And so valence, we say it's feeling good or bad. That's implying there's a moral content to those terms. But what is good for and what is not good for those organisms will be, I don't know if you see now, here's another question, the phenomenology. Will they be experienced as kind of being good or bad? I don't know. I can't answer that, but it will certainly have that effect, whether there's experience or not. But it's an interesting question.
Yeah, and also the angle of symbol grounding, which I think it was what we discussed in Oxford, if I'm not mistaken. I think we went a little bit on that. But because of time, we have to leave now. I want to claim, I will stop the recording now so we can finish it up. So thank you everyone who get up to here in the video.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Again.
Lovely to have the opportunity to present my work.